All right, we want to begin by looking at the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. The same passage we looked at last week. Page 796 if you're using one of our worship Bibles. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly after dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, crying out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" When they had climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Last week, I told you that I was working with some material from the book, "If You Want to Walk on Water, You've Got to Get Out of the Boat," by John Ortberg. And at that time, I wasn't sure if I was going to kind of make a series of this or just the one-shot deal. But I want to remind you that when we talk about walking on water, we're letting that represent for us doing with God's help what we could never do on our own. And that can apply to a whole lot of different things. So that's what we're working with. And then last week, we talked about some of those things, what is it that makes a water walker? What are some of those, the word characteristics is not really right, but some of those facts about walking on water. One is that water walkers recognize God's presence. We said that water walkers discern between faith and foolishness. Water walkers expect and accept problems. And lastly, water walkers get out of the boat. You can't be a water walker if you stay in the boat. So I want to continue. There's several more of these factors that go into making one a water walker or helping one be a water walker. And we begin by saying that water walkers accept fear as the price of growth. How many Christians would like to grow as a Christian? Well, what we're saying is if that's true, you're going to have to accept fear. If you want to live without fear, you can't grow. If you want to grow, there's going to be fear involved. And truly the choice to grow is the choice for repeated fear and repeated fear and repeated fear. It's going to keep coming. Because in order to grow, you have to be stretching yourself and learning new things and experiencing new things. And the truth is, many of those things are scary. One evangelism teacher said that one of the things that Christians who hope to evangelize and the lost who need evangelizing have one thing in common. Neither of them want to do it. I saw one cartoon where these two guys were in a team of two, and they were going to go door to door and spread the gospel. And then they came up to one door and said, "Well, it's your turn. You go to the door, and I'll pray that no one's home." It's tough. And so the things that God calls you to do are often going to be stuff that's outside of your comfort zone, which means, the next point, to walk on water, you must renounce comfort as a primary value. People, I just want to be happy and comfortable. It's like, well, if that's what you want, you can't be the disciple. You can't be a water walker. Being a water walker means getting out of your comfort zone. The author asked a very interesting question. He said, guess what is the number one chair sale? What chair sells number one in America? And the answer was lazy boy, not risky boy, or not worker boy. Risky boy and worker boy did not make the top. The number one was lazy boy, because as Americans, we value comfort. We like to be comfortable. I mean, I'll tell you right now, I like to be comfortable. The question is, are you willing to give up comfortable for the right thing? If you're not, then you're too tied to comfort. It's okay to get comfortable, but if you're called to become uncomfortable, you have to be willing to do that. The good news is, or part of the good news is the fear won't go away, but you do get used to it. It's the kind of thing where you kind of learn that it won't destroy you. Things that you're afraid of, if you do them, you realize, well, that was scary, but I'm okay. And in my mind, that goes to, like roller coasters, for example. If you're the kind of person that was afraid to ride the roller coaster and you finally make yourself do it under peer pressure from your loving friends, you ride a few times, the next time you get on it, you're still afraid, but you think, you know what? I've done this a couple times, nothing happened to me, I can do this again. And so the fear is still there, maybe, but you kind of learn that it's not going to destroy you and it's going to be okay. So water walkers accept fear as the price of growth. Water walkers master failure management. And I really like this one because the point is sometimes you're going to fail. And the author says that failure is not an event, but rather a judgment about the event. So when you do something and it doesn't turn out the way you want it to, it's your attitude toward that. Winston Churchill, who most of you are familiar with, did you know that when he was in elementary school, he failed a grade and had to repeat it? And he referred to that time in his life as a second opportunity to get it right. Instead of looking at it as a failure, he said he received a second opportunity to get it right, which he did. And so it kind of begs the question about Peter falling into the water. Does that mean that Peter failed? Anyone? Well, it's true that he sank. That's just a fact. He did go into the water. But you know what? There were 11 bigger failures still in the boat. The ones that didn't get out of the boat, they're the ones that actually failed. Peter was brave enough to get out of the boat. And then secondly, you know what Peter had the privilege of, or that got to experience? Jesus lifted him up. So is that a failure? You try something for Jesus, it doesn't go the way you wanted it to, and Jesus kind of rescues you from that situation. Can you look back on that and say that was a failure? Not if you have the right attitude. It's not a true failure if that's the case. Water walkers see failure as an opportunity to grow, not as something that was just a total loss. When Peter fell, Jesus lifted him and picked him up and said, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And some of the biblical scholars say that When we hear that, we kind of think that Peter's being reprimanded. But some of the authors say what was really going on was therapy. Jesus was trying to get Peter to face the question of what went wrong. Why did you sink? Because you need to understand what happened in order for you to grow from this, in order for you to learn from this. So Peter had to realize that, why did you doubt? Well, I looked at the wind and it was kind of scary and the waves were big, and I began to think about everything I've learned from my entire life about physics concerning people walking on water. It just can't happen, and so on and so forth. And so Peter had to question that stuff. In fact, there are those who make the point that Jesus also, thinking about Peter's self-esteem and his pride and that kind of thing, that Jesus asked him that question when he and Peter were still out on the water. He didn't wait until they got in the boat and then ask him that question in front of the other 11. He wasn't trying to belittle Peter and humiliate him. He was trying to help Peter work through the experience. When you see failure as an opportunity to grow, it gives you a greater understanding of dependency on faith. Peter realized that if I'm going to succeed in this, I've got to depend more on faith. It was my faith that got me walking those few steps across the water. It was my lack of faith that caused me to sink. And so if I'm going to succeed, I'm going to have to become more dependent on faith. Sir Edmund Hillary, you all know who that is? He was the first person to successfully, he was the first European type person, non-Sherpa, to successfully climb Mount Everest and get to the peak. What a lot of people don't know is that Sir Edmund Hillary failed several times in his attempt. He tried it, didn't make it, tried again, a year later, whatever, didn't make it. But one day they say, before his final attempt, he made the statement that, facing the mountain, he said, I'm going to win because you are as big as you're going to get, and I'm still learning, still growing. So Edmund Hillary realized that there's this obstacle. That obstacle is not going to get harder, but he is going to keep getting better at it. And so one day he's going to pass that, and indeed he did. He got by it. Water walkers learn to wait on the Lord. Sometimes we just want to go ahead and move out on our own strength, and we want to go out before we're ready. So I want to share with you a little bit of the story of Dorando Pietri. Dorando Pietri is one of my favorite historical athletes. 1908 Olympic Games. We didn't have running down to the science we have it down to today. And a marathon is hard enough today. In 1908, in the Olympic marathon, 56 entrants. They took off, and he had been training, was doing well. But there was another guy who took the lead. And Dorando got news from some of his people up the course who sent word back that the guy who was in the lead was beginning to have a little trouble. So he picked up the pace, much to everyone's surprise, and by the time they hit the 20-mile mark, he was well on his way to catching the guy, finally caught the guy at 24 miles. But that effort to catch and pass this guy took its toll on Dorando Pietri. He entered the stadium where you were supposed to do one lap around the stadium to the finish line so that the crowd could all watch you win the race. He got inside the stadium and turned the wrong way. Began to run. Some officials ran out and waved him down and stopped him, and he kind of turned around and he fell. He just collapsed. The judges that were on the track, they helped him get up, turn him in the right direction. He took off running again, and over the course of the lap, he fell down 7 times. And each time they helped him up and he got running again. Finally made it. They said that after a 2-hour and I think it was 56-minute run, the last lap around the track took him 10 minutes. It was a long journey. Fell 7 times. So he crossed the finish line in first place. He was not an American, by the way. The Americans, in second place, immediately protested. They said, well, the rules are, the judges can't lift the guy up. And so they that's true. He's disqualified because he had help getting up every time he fell down. So he didn't actually get the gold medal. Went on to be one of the most famous runners of that era. Had made a lot of money traveling around speaking, meeting people, and going to events and stuff. But I tell that story because at the time, there was probably almost no one in as good a shape as Durando Pietri. Yes, he overdid his own strength, but I want to turn to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 30. Read 30 and 31. Isaiah says, even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. And many other translations say those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. And so you have this picture of no matter what good of shape he was in, there's the need to wait on the Lord. That's where your real strength comes from. So I'm not suggesting we all go out and run a marathon this week. But when you run the marathon of life, for one of those figures of speech, you've got to wait upon the Lord. Because without waiting upon the Lord, without hoping in the Lord, without putting your confidence in Him, you're just not going to have enough strength to do it on your own. And you will stumble and fall, just like Durando Pietri did, even though he was one of the most fit people in the planet at that time. And then water walkers, kind of shifting a little bit, we've talked about you're going to have fear, there's going to be problems, there's going to be discomfort. So the question comes up, why risk being a water walker? If all these bad things happen, if all these hard things go hand in foot with being a water walker, why do it? And I want to give you 4 or 5 answers here real quick. One is that it's the only way that real growth and true faith development happen. If you're not willing to walk on water, you're going to kind of stagnate and never really grow. Secondly, it beats the boredom of an unfulfilled life. One of my favorite movies from the 80s was Crocodile Dundee. Y'all seen that? Some of you have. There's a scene in which the main character, Crocodile Dundee, he goes and visits a gang to solicit their help in attacking a bad guy's fortress where they've kidnapped this lady and they want to go rescue the lady. And so he says to the gang, who thinks they're the coolest thing ever, "What'd you do last night?" And one of the gang members jumps up and says, "We didn't do nothing. We were right here all night," in their clubhouse. And he looks at him and says, "Is that what you call cool?" Tomorrow, when someone says, "What did you do last night?" you can say, "We stormed a fortress and rescued a lady," or you can say, "We didn't do nothing. We were here all night." Which would you rather do? So the question can come up, do you want to tell somebody that you walked on water, or that you stayed home and you're lazy boy? Figuratively. walking on water is part of discovering and obeying your call. The truth is, God called, let Peter walk on water here. Eventually, Peter was going to stand up and preach to a crowd of 2,000 people after Jesus' crucifixion, or a crowd in which 2,000 people got saved. It would have been a bigger crowd. But that began partly when Peter walked on water. That learning to depend on Jesus and having that faith and being willing to step out helped Peter to become the person that he became. And of course, the last answer is, if you want to be a water walker, be a disciple of Christ, the water is where Jesus is. There were moments when Jesus was in the boat and did some things in the boat, but the reality is, if you want to be where Jesus is, you have to get on the water, because that's where he is. He doesn't just hang out in the boat. He doesn't just, Jesus doesn't spend his week in this building. We come here on Sunday morning and have worship, whatever, when we leave. Don't think that this is where Jesus lives. I think it's a disservice that we've gotten into the habit. I try to avoid it, and maybe we're doing better after I've been here 20 years. But when we talk about this as being God's house, I don't like that terminology. It's God's house. He owns it, but he doesn't live here. When we're out and about, Jesus is also out and about. And if we want to be with Jesus, we need to be where he is, not just always ask him to be where we are. Subtle difference there. I conclude by saying, again, let's go for a walk on the water. Let's pray.